Huw Edwards was one of the most famous men in Britain, also a trusted figure because of his unique role as chief news anchor of the BBC. After a year-long spiral downwards, he is now in a state of disgrace. The former BBC News at 10 presenter has pled guilty to 3 counts of possessing indecent images of children. Now, Edwards was originally taken off air last summer after a story in The Sun about an unnamed presenter who had paid a young person tens of thousands of pounds for explicit images. In the end, his wife revealed that Huw Edwards was that presenter and said that he was suffering from mental health problems. Now, someone who knows Huw Edwards well is the Times' television writer Andrew Billen, who joins us now. Morning to you, Andrew.
Morning, Esma.
Now, you've had a couple, we've spoken to you before about this, you had a couple of long lunches in your capacity as a journalist with Huw Edwards. And we very much enjoyed reading them in the past. But you've written in the Times today that you feel you shouldn't have been surprised by this revelation. Why do you say that? And sometimes I feel that a lot of people who, have known people who then have some dark stuff that's gone on feel almost guilty that they didn't pick up on this stuff. And I mean, clearly, you have no reason to feel that way.
Well, you feel hoodwinked in a way by the man's charm and charisma. I had 2, as you say, I interviewed him twice and then I had lunch with him twice. The second time was the day before he disappeared from our screens just over a year ago. He's very funny. He's very gossipy. I thought he was vain and paranoid, but not in a clinical sense. He was very worried about his position at the BBC, how long he could stay chief anchor. And when you look back, and sometimes I've had friends who I've had difficult conversations with, and who then suffered from mental health, or tell me that they have suffered from mental health problems. And I think how stupid was I that I didn't pick up on that. Of course, the making of indecent images of children is something way beyond my comprehension, and I don't feel guilty for not picking up on that. I mean, how could you? The man was a deeply concealed personality.
I mean, obviously I've worked at the BBC, and I suppose I've never met Huw Edwards, but this sounds quite familiar. It's a kind of, people who are the big ticket stars of any organisation. Success and flattery stalk them, but also insecurity. There's this deep insecurity that it could all be taken away from them at any point, that they won't be the kind of, the chief whatever anymore. And I think that is something that's quite common, actually, and I'm in no way excusing anything that's going on. I'm trying to explain why people perhaps present in one way, but actually are very different.
Yes, I think that's right. He was a boy from nowhere, I guess. He was from an ordinary background in Wales. He felt he was an outsider. He wasn't one of the Oxford boys on the BBC training course, and he got everything he wanted. He rose to the top of his profession. He had a gift for presenting with authority, but that's only half of it, isn't it? You get there, and then 20 years on, you wonder how long you can stay up there. The real art of it is to live with yourself, whatever happens, whatever the judgments of your bosses are, however much they lie to you. You're right. I was talking to a friend who worked at the BBC for a long time yesterday, and he said he was talking to a senior executive of BBC News and Current Affairs, and this person simply stopped talking to him in order to go over to Huw Edwards and basically fawn all over him.
God, yes.
But Huw is a very bright guy, and he knows this is nonsense as well. And that as he told me in that very first interview, the BBC is a very treacherous place.
As you said, these are incredibly serious things that he has pled guilty to. But I'll read this out later, actually, because the separate thing, perhaps it's separate, I don't know if it's linked, whatever, that's been running along is the stuff in the Sun today. And we're going to be speaking to the editor of the Sun, Victoria Newton, later on in the programme. This idea that there were many people getting in touch, complaining within the BBC and getting in touch with the Sun about just inappropriate kind of interactions on, by text or WhatsApp or whatever between Huw Edwards and, other people at the BBC. But in your piece, you also describe a veiled contempt that he had for other colleagues that he worked closely with. And yet, there seems to have been some kind of people turning a blind eye to the stuff that might have been going on around Huw Edwards and perhaps other younger members of staff.
I mean, is there some view that when you become as big and famous and trusted and well loved as Huw Edwards, that your colleagues accept they're a bit weird, they're a bit different, they're untouchable, but they have a bit more leeway in how they behave in the office. I mean, when I look back on those lunches where Huw at least consumed a great many glasses of champagne, I think that was inappropriate behaviour.
Yeah.
And these were off the record lunches with a journalist he trusted. But I think it was, looking back, it was deeply inappropriate of him to slag off his colleagues to someone like me.
And what was it? He had 6 glasses of champagne, and then at 6 o'clock he said, "Oh, I need to go and sober up a bit. I'll have a few espressos because I've got to do the news at 10."
We met at 2 o'clock. He'd forgotten we were going to have lunch, and then so he arrived at 2 o'clock at the Langham, which is the big posh hotel restaurant opposite the new broadcasting house. And he immediately started ordering champagne. At about 5 o'clock, I said, "I think I need an espresso," and he ordered the waiter over and said, "A glass of champagne for me, an espresso for my friend, and he would have another glass of champagne too."
Yeah.
And about 6 o'clock, my wife was ringing me saying, "What's going on?" Hugh said, "Well, I've got to go now anyway because I'm doing the 10 tonight," which I was absolutely amazed. And I said, "Are you going to be all right, Hugh?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry. I'll have three pints of water, 3 espressos, and I'll be absolutely fine." And I have to say, when I got home that night, I wasn't feeling absolutely fine, but he presented the news at 10 impeccably.
Huw Edwards, the former BBC newsreader, pleading guilty to viewing indecent images of children. Now we're getting the feeling that more and more difficult questions are swirling around the BBC. Let's speak to the media correspondent Alex Farber, who's been following this story.
Huw Edwards was pled guilty to 3 counts of possessing indecent images of children, having exchanged some WhatsApp messages with a man who was later found to be a convicted paedophile. He's going to be sentenced at a later date, possibly mid-September. The magistrate asked for further information, and he indicated that he may well not have sufficient powers to hand down the sentence required, and it may have to go to a Crown Court. Later in the day, we discovered that the BBC itself was made aware of Edwards' arrest back in November regarding these allegations. He was subsequently charged in June, but it only the whole picture only finally fully came out this week, just days before his court appearance.
And so there are questions, aren't there, Alex? How are the BBC answering them about what they knew and when?
Well, the BBC has said that it would have taken decisive action and effectively dismissed Edwards had charges been brought against him whilst he was employed. At the point at which he was arrested in November, Huw Edwards was suspended by the BBC, but they suggest that an arrest in and of itself isn't a sackable offence. They continue to pay him. He was the third highest paid BBC star last year. He earned £479,000, and he continued to earn that salary right up until he resigned in April, which was shortly after the individual who he was received the messages from was convicted of his crimes.
Okay. What comes next, Alex? There'll be a sentencing?
Yeah, as I said, that's due. We're expecting it to be mid-September. I mean, before then, look, there is questions the BBC faces. Did it do enough? I mean, hindsight's a great thing. Did it do enough in November when it was made aware of the arrest? Is Is it right that it continued to pay Huw Edwards whilst whilst it knew he'd been arrested? You know, he had been handed a pay increase of around £40,000 the previous year. You know, was that the right thing to do? Is it able to claw back any of that money, which ultimately is licence fee payer funding? So, you know, the BBC does face questions. It's tried its best to. It says that it's handled the situation in the way that it felt it was best to do. But, you know, we're just hearing tonight reports that Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, is seeking an urgent meeting with Tim Davie, the Director General. She'll be looking to get clarity on some of these things, and we expect to get more answers, you know, as the days unfold.